Hello everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for coming out today. It's great to see you here. It's very much like a doctor to be running a few minutes behind. 5 minutes is pretty good for me. So yes, thanks for coming. We are planning a great day for you all. We've got our talk in here from now for about an hour. And after we finish having the talk here, there will be time for a few questions. And then we'll go through to the hall and we'll have separate little workstations. There's a food tasting and food demo table. There's, in the kitchen area, there's going to be a natural cooking display. There's going to be a health coaching station, a mental health station, and health checking as well. So it's going to be a pretty full and interactive afternoon. Hopefully it will be interesting for you all. So yeah, I'll just start by introducing myself. I'm Dr. Camilla Elliott. I'm from the UK. I moved to New Zealand about 5 years ago now. I worked down in the Waikato before we moved up here about probably just over a year ago now. And I've been working at Rastav Medical Center, which is a GP practice in the center of town here. So, yes. All right. So we've got an interesting topic to discuss today. It's about the microbiome. I don't know whether you would like to show me by raising your hand if you've ever heard of the microbiome before today. Is that something that has come up on your radar a bit? Yeah, so quite a few of you have heard of that. That's interesting, and some haven't. So, yeah, that's what we'll be diving into today to see what we can learn. All right. So let's just start at the very beginning. What is the microbiome? Well, the microbiome literally means all those trillions of microorganisms, so those are microbes or bugs that live on us and in us and on our body. And I suppose we've all been brought up to think that germs and bugs are all bad and all dirty and cause disease. So we're kind of, shaking that up a little bit today and looking at another side of it. So there are some fancy words in my talk. It's fine if they go over your head because we're trying to get the main points across. So these microbes or bugs can be bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other single-celled bugs is an easy way to put it. So you might have heard the term microbiota. That means all the actual bugs, and microbiome means all the genetic information within those bugs. So just for ease, I'm going to use the word microbiome, but that basically means all the different genetic material that is contained within all those bugs. All right. So where is your microbiome? I have been advertising this as a gut health talk, so it's pretty obvious we have a microbiome in our gut. We actually have a microbiome or beneficial and bacteria and bugs that are in our mouth, our small intestine, our large intestine, which is our colon or the main home of it. But it's also all over our skin, in our lungs, our genitourinary tract, and breast glands as well. So it's really no matter how much you scrub yourself, you will never get rid of all the bugs on you, and that is a good thing, not a bad thing. So we'll delve into that. Okay, so where do we get our bugs or our microbes from? We get them from loads of different sources, basically, but intimacy with others, we will share a good deal of our microbes with our close family, our intimate partners, people that we come into very close contact with, we will exchange microbes with. We can get microbes from our food, so maybe everyone has heard of probiotics or, fermented food. They'll be a rich source of microbes, but even non-fermented foods will probably have some on them. Outdoor spaces are a key source. So from the soil, getting your hands in the soil, going out in forests and in the bush, going to the beach, you'll be picking up beneficial bugs that way as well. And pets and animals are a great source of bugs, both good and bad, you know. So, for example, people who own a dog will have probably, you know, have been shown to have a more diverse gut bacteria than people who don't have pets. So, okay, so how does the microbiome develop? Well, it's actually acquired at birth. There's this wonderful system by when you give birth, you seed the infant with the maternal gut microbiome. And that's basically because of anatomy. Where the baby comes out is where the baby is sort of seeded, and that those beneficial microbes are given to the infant then. But breastfeeding is a really important way our microbiome is developed as well. And we do know now that cesarean birth can affect the diversity of microbes in our gut. So yeah, we start to see changes in the makeup of the microbiome in infants born through cesarean section. And then in infancy, breast milk is really key nutrition for the baby's microbiome. There is a very special substance in breast milk, which is amazing, that it's actually a fiber. It's a prebiotic fiber in breast milk that feeds and stimulates the good bacteria in the baby's gut. And those prebiotics make up a huge amount of the weight of breast milk. So yeah, breast milk isn't just only food for babies, but it's food for babies' microbiome as well, which is amazing. All right, so let's dive into what does the microbiome do? What do these bugs that live in our gut actually do for us? They can do both good and bad for us, depending on their diversity, the types of bacteria we have. But we do know that the microbiome impacts stress, anxiety, and mood. We know that our microbiome really influences our immune system. So infections, autoimmune disease, inflammatory diseases, there is modulation or effects that the microbiome can have on that. We know our microbiome supports our digestion. It helps us to release more energy from food. It helps us to break down certain food particles like fiber. And the microbiome actually makes vitamins for us as well. And then the bacteria in your gut produce substances that feed and nourish your gut cells. So yeah, pretty amazing. It's very wide-ranging what it does. And then that brings me on to short-chain fatty acids. So I'm sorry, I am a doctor. I can't help but put some jargon in here. But I'll try and explain it really clearly, because short-chain fatty acids are basically when our microbes eat fiber, particularly different types of fibers in our diet, they produce this fuel. You can think of it as fuel, which is called a short-chain fatty acid. So basically, it's like a fat, but normally fats are very long molecules. These are very short molecules. I think that's all the technical science we need, but short-chain fatty acids actually have been researched a great deal and they have a great deal of health benefits associated with them. So the thing that feeds your bugs, that makes more short-chain fatty acids, is essentially fiber and different fibers from plant foods. So we're going to look into that in a lot more detail later. But yeah, there are three main short-chain fatty acids that we think about: acetate, propionate, and butyrate, and they have really wide-ranging effects on our body. So yeah, this is just a little illustrative example of that. So all those different fibers and nutrients from food gets fermented or eaten by our gut microbiomes to form these short-chain fatty acids, and they have effects on our body that are vast and really, really positive. So this is one of my sciencey slides again, but it's just sort of showing you that short-chain fatty acids reduce inflammation in the lungs, so they can reduce asthma attacks. They increase insulin secretion from the pancreas, so they can help control diabetes. They reduce the storage of fat in fat cells. They reduce inflammation in the immune system. There are effects on muscle, liver, our brain, so really wide-ranging effects from these substances that our gut bacteria produce. All right, and so this then brings us on to the microbiome and disease. So there's this term dysbiosis. It's the opposite of symbiosis. Symbiosis means when two things work together to create a useful relationship, you could say. So our gut bacteria are usually in a symbiosis with our body, so they're providing beneficial effects. Well, they can get out of whack, and that's when there are these links to disease. So dysbiosis basically means there's a decrease in the diversity of those bugs in your bowel. You lose the beneficial microbes that are really good short-chain fatty acid producers, and you get an overgrowth of harmful or pathogenic, which means disease-causing microbes. And we do see this pattern of dysbiosis in the gut bacteria in many types of diseases. All right. So what causes dysbiosis? And this is, that real question that's almost like asking what can cause disease throughout our body. Well, this is one way. Through dysbiosis or an imbalance, our gut bacteria get out of whack, out of sync. And we're understanding more and more that both disease can cause this imbalance, but it can result in the imbalance as well. But stress and mental health can have a huge impact on your gut health. Emotional trauma, abuse, and then, of course, our lifestyle habits. I have sort of hinted at the role fiber plays because that's the preferred nutrient of our gut bacteria. Certain medication can affect our gut microbiome, which I will talk about later on as well. Food additives, hygiene is an interesting one. I mean, we've kind of gone through and past the hygiene hypothesis. That's the idea that our hyper-clean environments with bleach and sterilization may have increased the rates of allergic diseases possibly. Well, that sort of plays into the microbiome, sort of cutting out that diversity, getting rid of both good and bad bacteria at the same time. But aging can cause dysbiosis, and our genetic background can play a role. So this is just an article that was published during COVID showing they were looking at Chinese healthcare workers in the middle of right at the beginning of that COVID pandemic. And they tested their stool regularly over a period of time, looking for the bacteria, the health of their gut bacteria. And they could see changes and dysbiosis in their bacteria for up to 6 months after that acute stressful phase. So this is just highlighting that it's not just what you eat, but your whole well-being really plays into your whole wealth and your gut health as well. And then that brings me on to this idea of a gut-brain axis or a gut-brain connection. So that is, so let's look into that a little more. So basically, it's thought we understand more now that there's this bidirectional communication between our gut and our brain. So we understand a bit more about how childhood trauma or abuse, different stress, even just the way we look at the world, can actually change the function of our body and brain systems. So mental stress and depression can change our gut microbiome directly and damage the healthy diversity of our gut. And we also know the other side of the story is that when you change the gut microbiome, you can actually get improvements in depression, which is almost a radical thing to say. By changing the balance and the health of the bugs inside you, you can see improvement or even resolution in some cases of depression, which we're going to look at a study in a moment. All right. And yeah, that's it. There we go. This is the trial that I was talking about. It was called the SMILES trial. It was done by Australian researchers in 2017. It was a 12-week intervention for people who had a confirmed major depressive episode. So these were not just feeling a bit down, but they had been assessed that they really did have a major depressive episode. And they also chose people who had major depression and had poor diet scores. So that meant they were eating a lot of sweets, salty snacks, processed meats, and these are the ones they enrolled in that trial. And this is what they told. They basically had a support group who basically just had befriending and social support. And then they had a diet group. And in the diet group, they were asked to eat a modified Mediterranean diet. So that basically was whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, which are beans, lentils, chickpeas, nuts, raw and unsalted nuts, olive oil. They had low-fat, unsweetened dairy, eggs, fish, chicken, and then a limited amount of lean red meat. So this, for what the diet was of the people going into this study, this was a huge change in their diet. They started eating more than 50 grams of fiber a day. They had loads more diversity and fiber and plants. And then this is just a visual example. You can see here on the left of your screen the diet intervention. So these were their scores on the depression scale. 25 is moderate to severe depression on the scale that they used. And then the social support group is here on the right. So they were about the same to start with. Those are the columns in blue. By the end of 3 months, there was a really statistically significant difference between the social support group on the right and the diet intervention on the left. And that was with nothing else. They didn't have any counseling. They didn't have anything else except diet change or social support. And there was a really significant difference in their depression scores. So this is a bit of like a very exciting and new field in the realms of psychology that hadn't really been mainstream before this study. So it's really fascinating. There is both, top-down effects on our gut and gut-up effects on our brain. All right. And I thought I would mention briefly in this talk the gut-brain axis in IBS. IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, is a really common problem. I see a lot of my patients come to me with that. And IBS is usually characterized by abdominal pain related to bowel habits. And you either get diarrhea, constipation, or you get an alternating pattern. So it's really, really common, this condition. And the gut-brain axis gives us a bit of an insight into it as well, because you can see at the top there at the brain that chronic stress and depression sort of feeds into a dysfunctional microbiome. Then you get this kind of leakiness of the gut. You get immune activation. You get super sensitive bowels. So studies have shown that in people with irritable bowel syndrome, when you pump air into their bowel to do a colonoscopy, a camera test, they feel pain at much higher rates than people without IBS. And we call that visceral hypersensitivity. It just means you really feel increased pain from normal symptoms, normal gas in your gut. And then that leads to pain, bloating, and altered bowel movements. And then sort of conversely to that, in the healthy state, the stable mental status supports and feeds into the functioning microbiome, an intact gut lining, and controlled inflammation. And then you get normal bowel movements. You don't get abdominal pain. So this works both with the stress, depression, and anxiety feeding into IBS and the gut bacteria imbalance feeding back up into the depression. So it's this amazing sort of feedback loop. And I don't have time in the talk to really dive into specific conditions like irritable bowel syndrome. But after the talk now, when we're out in the hall, when we're doing our food tasting and workshop, I do have some resources that I can show people if you have specific gut complaints, or if you need some more detailed advice on what you can try. Of course, I can't give you personal medical advice, but I can show you some things there. All right, and so this then is looking at dysbiosis. So that's that imbalance in the gut bacteria in irritable bowel syndrome as well. And so we do know that irritable bowel syndrome will often be triggered by a gastrobug. You know, you've gone on holiday, you caught a bug, you come back, and then your gut is out of whack for months afterwards. Well, that's a known cause of irritable bowel syndrome, and that is thought to be caused a lot by this imbalance in the gut bacteria. We call it dysbiosis. But other things can certainly play a role. Stress plays a huge role in irritable bowel syndrome. Our diet plays a role, and I'll come to diet shortly. We know heavy alcohol intake, even high dietary protein, very high protein diets can disbalance or cause imbalance in our gut microbiome. And then antibiotics. Antibiotics sadly kill the good bacteria as well as killing the bad bacteria. And I'll definitely talk about antibiotics again, because antibiotics are a life-saving medicine, and I don't want to sound too negative against them. But I also want to say that they do harm our gut microbiome, and many times they are not necessary. So try to take your GP's advice. If they're telling you it's a viral illness and antibiotics won't make a difference, I wouldn't take antibiotics unnecessarily. But if your GP tells you, look, you really need antibiotics for this problem, then I would definitely take them in that case. All right, and then this is just another illustrative example of the gut-brain axis in IBD. So IBD is different to IBS. IBD is the inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. So that's quite different to irritable bowel, where there's no visible or microscopic abnormalities in the bowel. But it is thought that some of these effects are present in that condition too. All right, so we've done the gut-brain axis. Now we're going to have a quick look at the gut-immune axis. I think it's pretty amazing to realize actually 70% of our immune cells are in our gut. I certainly, when I went to medical school, was taught that we have vestigial organs, the tonsils and the appendix, that are totally defunct and serve no purpose. Well, actually, they are hubs of immune cells and immune activity. So it's thought that after a gastrobug, that your appendix is a source of good bacteria to recolonize your gut. So actually, yeah, I don't think they're useless organs. And our tonsils are immune tissue. And all through our digestive tract, we have immune tissue. So yeah, our gut microbiome and our short-chain fatty acids, there's that word again. So that's the fuel that the microbes produce, that they train our immune system. So they can reduce our risk of infectious viral illness, which is amazing. During COVID, they found that people who eat a more diverse, plant-rich diet had a lower risk of severe COVID compared to people with poor diet scores. And so that probably feeds into this gut immune axis there. We know that your gut microbiome and short-chain fatty acids influence your risk of allergies, asthma, eczema, acne, autoimmune diseases, and even cancer risk. So it's a really amazing interplay. We think basically you've got this strange situation with your gut where your immune system has to learn to tolerate hundreds and hundreds of bugs that live in your body, because normally if a disease-causing bacteria gets into your body will mount a huge immune reaction. We call that sepsis, and you end up in intensive care and you're terribly ill. But all of us have immune systems that are tolerating our gut bacteria. And so that toleration, like being able to tolerate bugs, is how our gut microbiome then interplays with our immune system. It's sort of teaching and training our immune system to tolerate benign or helpful bacteria. All right. Okay. Yeah, there is also something called the gut-skin axis. I just did sort of touch on that with eczema, with acne. We're understanding more now that is all interlinked as well. All right, and then another condition I thought it would be good just to mention is the microbiome and diabetes. So we do know that with diabetes, you have this long-term low-grade inflammation, and obesity, we know that obesity is strongly linked to diabetes as well. So often the heavier you become, the more at risk you are of developing diabetes. And that's thought to be linked to that low-grade inflammation that you get with both conditions. And inflammation in the body drives this thing called insulin resistance. It means that your body can't utilize sugars and carbohydrates in the normal way. And we know that people with diabetes, you often produce lower amounts of these beneficial short-chain fatty acids as well. All right. Yes, here's a little description of how in obesity and diabetes, we see an increase in opportunistic bacteria, dysbiosis, and that leads to inflammation and a lot of different cellular changes that increase the risk of diabetes. And then in health or in the healthy state, the microbiome can be protective against diabetes. All right, so yeah, that's quite a bit of the science stuff. I couldn't fit all of the ways the microbiome influences our health into this talk because it's a huge topic. There's so much research about it, but that's just a bit of a taster for you. So now we're going to move on to what can we do to make our gut microbiome healthier? How can we support our whole person health? So, I mean, this slide is a real summary of that, and we'll break it down in the coming slides. So, eating a variety of plants, movement, physical exercise, sleeping well, trying to get consistent sleep, stress management, trying to be present and reduce anxiety as best as possible, staying calm, and loving people. This is the American Lifestyle Medicine logo. This is a summary of what they recommend. So yeah, these steps are all very important for a healthy gut bacteria and a healthy whole person. So here we go, how to optimize your microbiome. So we're going to look at all these things: stress management, dietary factors, sleep, exercise, medication, harmful substances, and supplements I will talk about briefly as well. Okay, so the first point, which I think is really important for a talk about the microbiome, is fiber. And I've said don't starve your microbes. So when you think about eating, we always think like, what do I want to eat? What might be good for me? But we can add in this second layer. What do my microbes want to eat? And by feeding them, I'm supporting my whole health. So there are actually hundreds of different types of fiber because every different plant that we eat has a different type of nutrient and fiber that can feed and nourish our gut microbiome. But I've kind of categorized them into soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, and resistant starch. So soluble fiber are things like your chia seeds, your flax seeds, your oats and barley. Many beans have it too. So that is the preferred fuel for microbes. They ferment or eat that very readily. It lowers your cholesterol. It helps slow glucose absorption, so that's excellent for diabetes. It slows your digestion, and it helps to control hunger. So those are all wonderful things that we need. And then insoluble fiber is your traditional roughage. That's your bran, your Wheat Bix, your wheat bran, that kind of stuff. That increases stool bulk. It's not the best fuel for microbes. They can ferment that, but it's not their preferred food source. And it does help control hunger through bulk. And then resistant starch is actually quite interesting, which I don't know if any of you heard of resistant starch before. Does that ring a bell? No. Okay, resistant starch is a type of fiber because it's starch is basically in all of our starchy foods: rice, potatoes, bread. Some food products, the starch absorbs really fast into our bloodstream, but sometimes the starch is complicated to break down in the upper parts of our digestive tract, and that's called resistant starch. Our microbes love resistant starch. They produce loads of short-chain fatty acids when we eat resistant starch. We know resistant starch lowers cholesterol and lowers our blood sugars as well. So let's look into this in a bit more detail. So just thinking about some of the best sources of soluble fiber. So yeah, our oats, our barley, our psyllium husk, which is your doctor might prescribe you as Consil D or Metamucil, but chia seeds and flax seeds, our microbes love eating that, and they produce a lot of short-chain fatty acids from that. Fruits will be a good source of this as well, like apples, pears, many other fruits have it. Vegetables, some people say they don't like eggplant. If you know how to cook it really nicely, it can be delicious. But that's a really rich source of soluble fiber, as are Brussels sprouts. Maybe not everyone's favorite. But as long as we get a huge variety of, I think the trouble comes when we know, okay, I like broccoli and I like carrots and I like potatoes. And if we just eat that all the time, we're just not nourishing all these many different bugs in our gut to support our health. So try a new veggie, try some new fruit, try a nut you haven't had before. All of that supports your gut microbiome. And then nuts, seeds, and beans and lentils are rich sources of soluble fiber as well. So then insoluble fiber, interestingly, all the foods that have soluble fiber, nearly all have insoluble as well. And these are all just our different types of plant foods: beans and whole grains, nuts and seeds, veggies, fruit, all the good stuff. But we just want to try and get variety of those because, for example, in our gut, we might have a colony of bugs that love broccoli, but we also have a colony of bugs that loves rye or chickpeas, So we just have to try to get that variety and to feed these beneficial microbes. And when we feed them, they then fuel us with these short-chain fatty acids and other benefits as well. And then resistant starch, that's the one most of you probably haven't heard of before, but resistant starch is really in most starchy foods. It does depend on the way you prepare the food, though. So the foods that have resistant starch in them naturally will be things like chickpeas, rye, millet, oats, green bananas, interestingly, because the starches have not turned into sugars. And then this is the interesting part, is that when you cook food, like when you cook potatoes or white rice even, when you let it cool down, the starch within it like cross-links back up together. And then when you eat that, even if you reheat it again, then you have a significant increase in the resistant starch in the food. So we can actually all easily get more resistant starch by eating leftovers. And who doesn't love leftovers? They save us time in the kitchen. So yeah, in fact, every time you cook and cool and reheat and cool food, you do create more resistant starch. You need to be careful, of course, about food safety and make sure food is really properly heated. Especially rice can cause a nasty gastroenteritis. But yeah, in general, if you've stored your food safely in the fridge and then you're reheating it hot, you're increasing the resistant starch in it. Okay, so another really interesting study. I guess I'm a doctor. I get excited when I read research studies. But it is actually an exciting topic, this one. This one was done in 2014. And they had a group of African Americans and a group of rural South Africans. And they used those people because they're genetically similar, but their lifestyles are totally different. And the rates of colon cancer are much higher in African Americans than in rural South Africans. In fact, the rate here is 65 cases per 100,000 in African Americans and less than 5 in 100,000 in rural South Africans. So that's amazing. It's not genetics that determines all our disease risk, but it's lifestyle. So so the higher rates are associated with higher animal protein and animal fat and lower fiber consumption. So those are really striking differences. And because of these differences in diet, scientists can sort of analyze the products in their gut. They can look at various chemicals and biomarkers that increase cancer risk, colon cancer risk, and factors that decrease cancer risk. So all they did were 2-week food exchanges. They gave the African Americans the South Africans' diet and the other way around. And actually, they started this study by doing a colonoscopy on all the participants. They didn't find one single polyp in the rural South Africans, and it was something like 3/4 of the African Americans they removed benign polyps from. So polyps in your bowel are a precursor to bowel cancer often. It just takes a number of years for a polyp to turn into bowel cancer. And I must say, not every polyp does, but yeah. So yeah, let's have a look now. So basically, the rural South Africans were given beef and fatty meat at every meal. That was more like the African American, like the deep South of American diet. They had low fiber intake with refined grains, and they were given minimal fruits and veg. And then the African Americans got the South Africans' diet, which included something called high maize. It's a cornmeal that had really high levels of resistant starch in it. I think the South Africans prepare it like a porridge and eat it during the day. But and then one of the meals a day contained fish, like salmon or fatty fish, and 2 of the meals were vegetarian, based on beans, and every meal had this corn product in it. So yeah, this is looking at the breakdown of the nutrients. So before the diet, the African Americans were getting 14 grams of fiber a day, which is way below the recommended intake. And they were getting like 35% fat, 47% carbs, and 15% protein, like a pretty standard nutrient breakdown there. And then the rural Africans were eating just 16% of their calories from fat, which is really low fat. And they were eating 72% carbs, which is really high carbohydrate, interestingly, and quite low protein, 11%, but 66 grams of fiber a day. That is a lot. I mean, our recommended fiber intake for a woman is 28 grams a day and 38 grams for a man. So that is a lot of fiber. And after the intervention, they did get the African Americans eating 55 grams of fiber a day, which is a pretty good, very high fiber intake. So yeah, and basically the rural Africans were put on a low-carb diet, basically. They were eating 21% carb, 12 grams of fiber, and 50% fat. So yeah, that's interesting. And then, and basically what this study showed was that by the end of the study, all of those chemical risk factors that you saw in very high levels in the African Americans, you saw them, in the African Americans, you saw that immediately change to the rural Africans. So after 2 weeks, the pristine guts of the South Africans suddenly were producing all the toxic metabolites and breakdown products that the African Americans were producing before. And then when you swap them back, the effects went away. So it shows that, we can influence in some ways our disease risk very quickly. It's not just like cancer is a random thing that happens, although it can be sometimes, but there are chemical markers and substances that can be detected that we know increase our risk. So it's really fascinating, this study. It just showed within 2 weeks of a diet change, there were massive changes in their microbiome, in the substances that their bowel produced, and that translates into risk of colon cancer. So very interesting study. It's not in itself proving things, but it's just adding piece by piece more and more evidence to things. All right. So we've looked at fiber, we've looked at resistant starch, soluble fiber, insoluble fiber. That's the stuff our microbes love to eat. The next thing to talk about is plant-based variety. So there was some famous microbiome studies that were called the American Gut Project and the UK Gut Project. They were done in like the 2010s, and they had hundreds of thousands of participants, because it was actually a population contributing study. So if you wanted to donate a fecal sample and get your microbiome analyzed, they would do that for you, and then they would use that data to build up a picture, because they looked at diet sheets, and then they matched that with your microbiome score, and then by using that information, they worked out, what diets were associated with more diverse gut patterns. So the microbes that produce short-chain fatty acids were significantly higher in individuals who consumed more than 30 types of plants in a week, compared to those who just had 10. So that's fascinating. So 30 plants, that sounds like a lot, but that's not just vegetables. You don't have to eat 30 different types of vegetables in a week. But let's have a look. So these are the categories that count as a type of plant: fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and then herbs and spices count, but they don't contribute quite so much because we eat such a small amount of them. So that's just trying to think, can I include a different whole grain this week? Do I only ever eat whole wheat, or could I try some oats or some buckwheat, or all these different varieties? And for your beans, do you only ever eat one bean, baked beans, or could you try some black beans or some chickpeas or some lentils? And all that variety counts towards improved diversity in the gut. And a simple way to do that is often just to buy mixed nuts and mixed seeds and a tin of mixed beans, and you get 5 in 1 with minimal effort. All right. And then another nutrient in food that supports our microbes, our microbes love eating these things called polyphenols. Polyphenols are chemicals in foods that often give a bitter or a bright color to things. So all your berries, purple berries, red berries, they've got those strong pigments in them, and they're very high in these chemicals called polyphenols that feeds your gut bacteria. But also it's present in vegetables. Red onion, for example. Capers, for example, are very high in polyphenols. Beans and soy, nuts, olives, herbs and spices, possibly even dark chocolate, but I didn't put that on the slide because, But yeah, so there are interesting sort of bitter flavors, dark, bright colors. Those things are rich in polyphenols. They're good for our microbes. And then fermented foods. I don't know, they're pretty trendy these days, aren't they, fermented foods? You go to the shop and you see kombucha bottles everywhere, and you see sauerkraut and kimchi and all those nice things. We do know that fermented foods provide beneficial microbes, so they're both probiotic, and they also are prebiotic. So prebiotic is like the fiber that feeds our bacteria. So they both give us good bacteria and they feed our good bacteria. And I'm going to just look at one last study about the benefits of fermented foods, how they reduce inflammation in our body. So it's interesting that cultures all around the world will often have a heritage of fermented foods. You know, before refrigeration, salting food was the way that you could eat it during winter. And when you salt foods, that's when the beneficial microbes can preserve them, and you reduce and prevent the growth of rotting, you know, the microbes that rot the food, and you also inhibit the mold as well that rots the food. Okay. Yeah, so this is this study. This was super interesting as well. They had a group of people who were overweight and who had poor diet scores. So they were not eating much variety, not much fiber. They were eating a lot of processed food. And they gave, for one group, they gave a high fiber diet. They asked them to, you know, increase their whole grains and their beans and their nuts and their fruits and veg. And then they had another group that they said, don't change anything in your usual diet, but just add fermented food to your diet. And it was so interesting what happened, because on the first diet, on the high fiber diet, on average, all the participants increased their short-chain fatty acid production, which is a great thing. But a very interesting thing happened in the high fiber group. Some people increased their inflammation, which was totally not what was expected, and some people reduced the inflammation in their body. And they worked out by reanalyzing the results that was because if you start a high fiber diet with a very poor gut microbiome, if you have very little diversity, you're not at all used to fiber, when you start a high fiber diet, it can actually increase inflammation. So that's very interesting, and maybe some of you will have experienced that when you try to eat more fiber, you get really bloated or you get a sore gut. It's really, really hard to increase it. And that might be because your starting microbiome is not used to those fibers. You're trying to feed bacteria which haven't really had much food before, and you get all these side effects. You get a lot of bloating. So that's interesting. So it was about 1/3 of the group in the high fiber diet. They had an increase or a worsening in their inflammation scores. And then we come to the high fermented food diet. And for all the participants on average, you saw an increase in microbiome diversity, which is exactly what we want. And for all of them, you saw a significant drop in inflammation, and they think that is because the fermented foods are increasing the diversity of your gut bacteria, increasing its ability to ferment and digest fibers. So if you want to really boost your gut microbiome, but you find fiber very hard to tolerate because you have IBS or you're just not used to fiber, you could definitely look at adding some fermented food in there. That sort of retrains your gut bacteria to accept high fiber food, to be able to utilize it, and then to benefit from that. And yeah, I wanted also to mention that if you're trying to increase fiber in your diet, don't go and whack a whole tin of lentils into your dinner and try to eat all of that. You're going to be really sore and really gassy. But if you want to increase your fiber, just like maybe take a tablespoon of chickpeas or mixed beans and add that to your normal food. And then as your tolerance grows, as you get more diversity in your gut bacteria, you will be able to tolerate more and more. So that's usually the key to being able to diversify and improve your diet. All right. Yeah, so that just summarizes that study about the high fiber and the high fermented food. And yeah, then we come to food additives and ultra-processed food. So like we all have this idea that junk food and ultra-processed food isn't that good for us. Well, yeah, it's not that good for us. And, you know, the reasons often come back to the microbiome, actually, because artificial sweeteners. So when people go from sugary Coke to artificially sweetened Coke, for example, they think, oh, I'm doing a real benefit for myself. And to be fair, if that is a stepwise improvement, it is probably a benefit to get off sugar, especially if you have diabetes. But now we're starting to realize that artificial sweeteners can disrupt our gut microbiome and can lead to dysbiosis as well. Flavorings and colors. Ultra-processed foods are foods that look like a normal food you could make, like bread or crackers or biscuits or sauces or pizza. They all look like a normal homemade food, but they're artificial, or they're sort of industrially processed. So all these amazingly clever food scientists have tinkered with them to make them as delicious and as difficult to stop eating as possible. And they do this by adding emulsifiers and plenty of sugar and salt and sweeteners and colors. And we do know now that those particular ingredients, like emulsifiers in bread, for example, can disrupt our gut microbiome and leads to dysbiosis. And there are undeniable links between ultra-processed foods, like all this in the picture, and obesity and diabetes. So, yeah, and it definitely has direct effects on our microbiome. Okay, so now we're basically done with the food. We'll come on now to stress management, how that can improve your gut health and your whole health. And I've got this sort of question to put to you. You know, is it the actual event that causes you stress? Is it the fact that you're stuck in traffic and you're late for work and the car in front of you stalls or doesn't go quickly? Does that cause you stress? Or is it actually the way you interpret that event? You know, is it the beliefs or the thoughts you have about that event? So are you thinking, oh, I'm going to be late for work, my boss is going to be angry with me? All these thoughts start to come through from that stimulus, from that event. And that's probably what, you know, that leads to the stress. It's not the traffic exactly, because if you weren't late for work, it probably wouldn't matter that much. But it's all the importance and all the value we put into a situation that can really drive our stress response to it. So in the workshops after here, we are going to have a counselor, a mental health therapist, just looking a little bit at how our thoughts and beliefs about illness, about stressful events, how that can lead to stress, which then can lead to illness and worsening of physical symptoms. So, yeah, and then other ways we can manage stress are through nature. Get outside, get the sun on you, go for a walk, go to the beach. All those things are wonderfully relaxing and, you know, restorative to you. Connect with friends and family. Make sure you make time for people and socializing. That can be a source of real strength and energy for you. Think about movement as a way to manage stress. Think of movement like as a reward for a stressful day. Oh, I'll just get through this stressful day and then I can go for a lovely walk in the sunset or the evening. You know, you can reframe things from being a chore and a burden to being a reward or a pleasure for you. You know, taking some time to read something, reflecting on something you've read, that can give your mind a chance to unwind rather than the constant scrolling through social media, which stimulates, which gives you like this pleasure reward circuitry all the time. Reading and thinking a little bit can just relax our brain rather than stimulate all the time. And yeah, finding faith in God or in a higher power that you can feel that support for your life and feel, not alone in your struggles and your stress as well. Okay, so yes, exercise actually directly affects our microbiome. We know that regular exercise increases microbiome diversity and it increases short-chain fatty acid production as well. And it's an excellent way to manage stress. Sleep. So sleep has a huge impact on our gut microbiome. Our whole body works in circadian rhythms, which is mostly set by our brain, but our gut works according to circadian rhythms as well. I don't know if you have ever, when you travel, for example, and you're jet lagged, or you wake up, you go to bed too late and you're really hungry at night, you eat, and then your whole digestion is out of whack. You're gassy, you're bloated, you get indigestion. That's because our gut and our whole body works in these circadian rhythms. We're much more able to process and digest food in the earlier in the day. There's this new idea of chronobiology. It means time-related patterns and biology in our body. So there's a definite effect on regular good sleep and gut microbiome diversity. All right, so supplements. So many of my patients ask me, should I be taking a probiotic? How can I stop my kid getting a cold all the time from daycare? If I'm on antibiotics, do I need to be on a probiotic as well? Well, probiotics there's been a lot of research on them, but there are only specific bacterial strains which have some evidence to show they help specific conditions. So taking a random generic probiotic for a problem is very unlikely to result in an improvement, to be honest. The research has been done looking at specific strains on their effect on specific things like eczema, constipation, diarrhea associated with antibiotics. So unless you really know that the probiotic has some evidence and support for the specific condition you're trying to treat, I probably wouldn't waste my money on them. They're very expensive. I don't know how much of them lasts from when you buy them off the shelf to when you take them. They're probably not the answer at the moment, to be honest. I would much rather go for the dietary changes, the fermented foods, which are nature's sort of probiotic, really. And then prebiotics are another supplement. They're basically fiber supplements. They come in a whole range of different things as well, and there probably is a little bit of evidence that some of them can help certain problems. One called inulin, for example, has been shown to reduce the frequency of colds in primary school children, but it's still very early days in the field of pre and probiotics. And then if you are online, you might see all sorts of strange things about gut health on TikTok, on Instagram. You get all these weird and wonderful things, people telling you that a carnivore diet where you only eat meat is great for your gut and that's going to heal your gut. There just is not the evidence behind that. All this stuff about bone broth and gelatin, and it's just, I think it's hype, to be honest. There isn't that really, really good evidence to show that if you only eat meat, you're going to have a great microbiome. It's actually the total opposite. You need loads of variety of plants, as much as you can. So I would give you a word of caution. Don't spend a lot of money on expensive supplements. I think, It's already expensive enough in the supermarket, but spend your $1 there rather than in Chemist Warehouse or somewhere. All right, and then I guess prescription medicine might be interesting to you, because we do know that some prescription medicine has a harmful effect on our gut and our microbiome, but you might also be quite surprised to know that some medication actually has a beneficial interaction with our microbiome. So if I just start with the harmful effects, so anti-inflammatory pain relief, that's your ibuprofen, your naproxen, your diclofenac, your celecoxib, which is very effective for a lot of pains, for arthritis and various other things, but it does directly damage our gut, particularly our stomach. It inhibits the protective mucus layer. It sort of eats that away, and then you can bleed from your stomach. You can get ulcers. You can get a worsening of reflux. So we do know, and then we do know they have a direct negative effect on the gut. And then proton pump inhibitors. Many of my patients are on proton pump inhibitors, which are omeprazole, pantoprazole, reflux medicine. They also negatively impact our microbiome. They actively reduce acid production in the stomach, which is actually important for our digestion and the destruction of disease-causing microbes. And they block the absorption of vitamin B12, of certain minerals as well. So they are not a medicine I would encourage you to take long-term, unless your doctor has specifically said you need to take them long-term. And some conditions you do need to take them long-term. And then antibiotics. So antibiotics, obviously a life-saving medication. Millions and millions of people have died in world history because of infection and sepsis. But now antibiotics are way overused. I can't tell you how many people come to me with a cold or a sore throat or a cough and ask directly for antibiotics. And I know the only reason they've come to see me is because they want antibiotics. And I also know that more than likely they have a viral illness where antibiotics won't make a jot of difference. It will just disrupt their microbiome and potentially cause resistant bugs. So I would strongly urge you, if your doctor really is telling you this is totally consistent with a viral illness, there are no signs of bacterial illness, then don't push them to give you an antibiotic, because it's not doing you any good. But yeah, I don't want people to feel afraid of antibiotics. They are life-saving medicines for the right problem. And then, the beneficial effects, beneficial interacting medications. Interestingly, metformin, which is a diabetic medication, has been shown to improve and increase diversity of gut microbiome. So it probably a lot of its benefits, because it does cause a little bit of weight loss. It improves blood sugar control. And so there's just some early studies suggesting it has a beneficial interaction with our microbiome. Birth control pills the way they work is also in conjunction with bacteria in the gut. So that might be why, for example, women who have diarrhea and vomiting are suggested to take extra precautions and things, because of that complex interaction between estrogen cycling between our liver and gut. I'm sorry I don't have time to go into all the specifics. And then antidepressants, things like sertraline and citalopram, they often have gut side effects, but they interact with our gut microbiome, because actually most of our serotonin, which is this hormone thought to be linked to depression, is produced by our gut microbiome. And in our gut, we have something called a gut brain, which are just tons of nerves into our gut that link to our brain. And even more excitingly, some cancer treatments have beneficial interactions with our microbiome. So this paper was looking at immunotherapy. So that is a treatment for cancer that sort of wakes up and activates your immune system. And they found that whether you respond well to that or you don't respond to that it seems to have something to do with the diversity of your gut microbiome. So So that's fascinating, like a fascinating research for medicine in the future is whether, we can make medication that will interact somehow with the microbiome to treat disease as well. So, yes. Okay, so we've got through the talk, and I just thought I'd come back to that summary. So how to optimize your microbiome. I've given general advice here, and you might have your own specific health problem, your own digestive issues. So, maybe speak to a trained professional, maybe speak to your doctor, do some research about things. I've got some resources I'll show you in a minute. And just try maybe some little sustainable changes. Try not to make massive changes all at once and end up with a sore gut and go right back to what you used to do. But just some little changes towards including healthier food, stress management, improved sleep. And there might just be one area on this list that you think you might need to improve. You might think, goodness, I could not do all of that. And most people can't make all that change. So just think, like, what in my life is probably the thing that is most negatively affecting me? Do I really need to, look into my sleep? Do I need to commit to a bit more regular exercise somehow? So just find an area that you think might be right for you to focus on. And that's going to be part of what we're going to do in the workshops out in the hall now. Just sort of help people to sort of think about what areas they would like to improve and work on. Okay, so this is a PhD dietitian. She's called Dr. Megan Rossi. She's an Australian woman who lives in the UK. She works with King's College London as a research scientist in the microbiome sphere. And she gives really accessible but evidence-based and scientific information about the microbiome. I really like her resources, and her website is really user-friendly. There's not too much sciencey jargon. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a science geek, so I couldn't help but put a few studies in. But she makes this information really accessible. And she has a book, actually, that looks at very common bowel symptoms like bloating, irritable bowel, all those different gut symptoms, and gives some really practical advice on how you could improve some of those things. So I would really recommend to have a look at her website. She's called The Gut Health Doctor. She's not a medical doctor, she's a PhD doctor. These are the books she wrote. So this one on the right called Love Your Gut. If you have a gut problem like irritable bowel or bloating, constipation, any unpleasant gut symptoms, she has such good detail and practical tips and support. I've borrowed this from the local library. I didn't want to buy it. So if you want to have a look, and if you have a specific issue you want help with, I would look at that first. And she's always sensible. She tells you signs that mean you need to see your doctor rather than just trying to muddle through by yourself. Okay, and then Zoe is a really interesting business that was set up in the US and the UK, and it's set up by scientists and dietitians and doctors who basically, it's a program where you send in your stool sample, they analyze your microbiome for you, they give you a microbiome score of diversity of healthy bacteria, and then they give you specific advice on what to eat that will boost your microbiome scores. So this is probably like the future of healthcare. I don't know of anything similar to that in New Zealand yet, but maybe it's coming one day. And they also look at blood sugar response to food and blood fat response to food. So it's quite a sort of personalized nutrition, personalized health approach. But they also have a podcast and a newsletter which has pretty interesting health information. And I think it's reliable and scientifically verifiable rather than just someone, making things up. Okay. All right, and then the last person I quite like is Dr. Will Bolsowitz. He's a gastroenterologist from the USA who does a lot of work in promoting microbiome and how to heal gut illnesses and problems as well. So those are really helpful resources. Okay, so yeah, that's the end of our talk. I'd be more than happy to answer a few questions if anyone can think of one after that long talk. Yes, thank you.
What's the difference between a viral and a bacterial infection?
Okay, yes. So viruses are tiny, like disease-causing particles that invade our cells directly and cause disease by hijacking our cell. Whereas bacteria are their own individual cell or entity that causes infection in a slightly different way. And our body, and the signs of a viral illness are often different to a bacterial illness. So, yeah. Yes, thank you.
Hormone fluctuation.
Yes.